Hello, everyone. Thank you for letting me spend some time with you today. I do appreciate it. If you know, you know, right? Do the like, share, subscribe things, all those kind of good things. Just help us out. Just a friendly reminder. I'm going to look at, all right. And that is, when did Moses know what he knew? When did he find out? So I think you'll see where I go with this, and I'm going to be honest. Okay, this is coming from a teaching I did for Messianic Delaware, and if you want to see the whole Zoom video, messianicdelaware.org is the website, but you're getting the shortened version for good reason. It took me about an hour to go through this with them, and there was back and forth exchange and comments as well with that. So interesting if you want to take a look at that. Didn't want to do that. There we go. There are some people who believe that the first 5 books of our Bible were written by many, many different authors and separated by many, many years. People in the 18th century started coming up with this, and they base it on really the use of the names. They say, he used, Susie found something to bark at. He uses the title Elohim for God in Genesis 1:1. But in Genesis 1:2, he also uses the title and the tetragrammaton, the Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the name. Well, if these scholars were looking at this and they say, oh, well, he couldn't have known it this, he couldn't have known that, there's just so much confusion in that. Maybe these scholars weren't so scholarly after all, because they don't differentiate between the name and the title. And if they're not smart enough to figure that out, well, I'm not going to listen to them. So I'm going to keep going under the assumption, right? I know that's dangerous sometimes, that Moses actually did write the first 5 books, because in my opinion, he did, for what that's worth. Now, although Genesis does appear to be the first book of the Bible, my question was, is it the first book that Moses actually wrote? And if so, when did he write it? Right? We're going to dig into this just a little bit, because it was Ezra and Nehemiah, or Nehemiah, however you want to pronounce that. They are the ones who are credited with canonizing the Hebrew Bible. And that can be found in 2 Maccabees 2:10, where it talks about Nehemiah actually building a library. He collected all the things that he could get his hands on. And as they were coming back out of exile, the people were looking around, and Ezra and Nehemiah were considered part of the Great Assembly, if I could use that word. That's what they call it. They were members. So they had all of these writings, all of this knowledge in front of them, right? Now, don't think of the writings that they had at that time as books like we have today. Some were scrolls, some were probably etched thin metal plates or sheets or rolls. We find these things, archaeologists have found these things today. So they're there. They may have been just fragments of other writings. And they sat down, they started looking at these things. They weren't quite sure what the order was, so they started putting it together in a way that made sense. If you looked at some of the notes I have in my office, if you came in, you'd kind of look around at it and go, what's he doing here? He's got notes scribbled here. He's got notes scribbled there. Everything seems to be in some type of disorder. But if somebody else, I know where it's all at, but if somebody else come in and tried to put it in any kind of orderly form or fashion, they'd have a hard time, right? They would have a really hard time. But if Genesis was not the first book that Moses had written, it appears to be written with all of the accumulated knowledge of the other books. Think about that. Think about that. And here's where we're going to get into this. Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning, God, and he uses the title Elohim, created the heavens and the earth. But in Genesis 2:4, he says, this is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created, not how they were created, but when they were created. Same creation story, told in two different methods, two different formats, two different narrations. This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created on the day that the Lord, the Tetragrammaton, because it's all in capital letters, right? So it's the Yud He Vav He in Hebrew. God, Elohim, so he uses the name and the title, made them. Might seem a little redundant, but that's how it's written. That is one of the styles of ancient Hebraic writing. Now, I've read that I don't know how many times. It's like, wait a minute. I have a question. Teacher, I have a question. I have a question, teacher. Teacher, got to look at me. I'm raising my hand, teacher. How did Moses know the name without Exodus 3:15? God also told Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, all in capital letters, so it's Yud He Vav He, the name, the actual name of God, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac. Now, God here is used as Elohim, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is my name forever. And it's how I am to be remembered by every generation. Moses, he's at the burning bush, and he's going, well, who am I going to tell him sent me? If you're sending me, who are you? What's your name? He didn't know. He knew God. He knew the title. He knew there was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He knew the creation story, I'm sure, from legends and other things. But now, at the burning bush, he says, wait a minute, you got to tell me who you are that is sending me so I can tell them and they're going to know. And he gives him the name. Moses could not have written Genesis without Exodus 3:15. It would have been impossible. Just like Genesis 7:2. You're to take with you 7 pairs of every clean animal, a male and its mate, and a pair of every unclean animal. How did Moses write this without Leviticus 11 that lays out what is clean and unclean animals? Think about these things. Moses could not have written Genesis without the knowledge of everything that our Creator had told him. Okay? If you look at Genesis 9:3, everything that lives and moves will be food for you. Wait a minute. There's clean and unclean, right? Why would you go through the motion of restating what is clean and unclean from Leviticus 11 here? If the people that Moses was writing to and for already knew. Right? Are you following me here? I hope, because if they had read Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers first, they would already know what was clean and unclean. They would already know what was and wasn't food. There's no need to clarify it to somebody who already knows. If you already know, you already know. So that's where I'm questioning just a little bit. And when I say I'm questioning which order the books were written in, doesn't mean I'm questioning the content. What I'm questioning is our confusion that comes from misunderstanding them. See, the problem is ours. The problem is not our creators. The problem is ours. The clarification needs to come from us. Now, there's some other things in there that also give us some indications, right? Now, remember Genesis 1:1. Well, Moses wasn't there to see it. He wasn't there to witness it. You know, it happened about 2,000 years before he was born. How did he get the information? It was directly given to him by our Creator. Now, there's about 400 times recorded in the first 5 books where Moses says, God speaks to him directly. The Lord said to Moses, okay? But he doesn't always give us a transcript of the entire conversation. What Moses learned, he wrote down one way or another. Now, there are some people who believe that he kept a type of diary, kind of. So he's learning all these things, and a lot of things were written down. He was told to write down quite a bit. During the 40 days, it's like, here, write the covenant. Well, the covenant it only takes up 4 chapters, right? So, if that's what he's writing, it didn't take him 40 days, but he's getting all of this information. He's getting all of this information. In fact, the only part of those first 5 books that cannot be attributed to Moses is Deuteronomy 34, where it talks about the death of Moses. Makes sense, right? Because he couldn't have written it after he died. There are a lot of different theories about who wrote it. Some think it was Ezra or Nehemiah. Some think Jeremiah. It could have been. It could have been. It could have been that somebody recorded it, and it was in one of those things that Nehemiah had collected. It's that simple. We're talking about real people living real lives, doing real things. But exactly when Moses writes Genesis, we really don't know. We just don't. But it made sense to put it first. Now, as Moses is going through his time in the wilderness, chances are he's writing these things down, and then, like a lot of things, people write things down, and then they will write. And I don't want to use the word prequel here. That's not what I'm getting at. But they will write something that leads up to where they began. And that's not really a prequel when we're talking about the Bible. It is not an afterthought at all. It's simply a history that shows us how we got to where we are. That's why it's a separate book. Now, for the scholars in the room, and I need to bring this up, if Genesis was not the first book that Moses has written, does it change the article of first mention? And you've heard me talk about this before. The article of first mention is finding the first time a word is used in the Bible, and quite often it is in Genesis. And we attempt to gain a definition, or the best definition, from that usage. Here's the problem. There are other words after Moses' death that don't appear in the first 5 books. The word Tabal, for example, means world. And it's not talking about the earth, because that's different. It's talking about people. Okay? It's talking about everybody who has ever lived, is living, or ever will live. That is the way that word is used the first time. If you want to look that up, it is Strong's number Hebrew 8398. Okay? So that's there. That's there. Does it change the overall message? No. Should it change the way we think about it? A little bit, yes, it should. Because as we're looking at Genesis, if we're thinking Moses already knew everything that he is putting in that book, then we have to assume, again, that's a little dangerous, right? We have to consider the possibility that everything Moses put in that book also is the accumulated knowledge of that 40 years in the wilderness. So it includes Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and all but the end of Deuteronomy. Does it change the way you think about Genesis now? Are there things in there that you have questions about? And it's like, how did they know that? How did they know that? Why did this happen? Why is this going on? But if you consider that Moses wrote that maybe after the others and before Deuteronomy, obviously, then what we get is a more complete and cumulative work. It wasn't written by several authors separated by several years, written by one author with all the knowledge of everything that he was told by our Creator. Something to think about. And if you want something else to think about, the books are available at authorjerrymitchell.com, or you can go to givegod90.com and follow the link there. Okay? Now, you got the very, very short version of that. Okay? I just did that in about 15 minutes. What took the folks at Messianic Delaware about an hour to go through. So there it is. Something for you to think about until next time. And until next time, I do wish you many, many blessings, everyone.